All right, everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Dr. Penny L. Hamrick Doctoral Student Colloquium series. We're so excited to be able to rename this event after our beloved Penny. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jamina Williams, and I'm the Director of Student Services in the School of Education here at Drexel University. Tonight's kickoff event for the 23-24 academic year is a special tribute and dedication to Dr. Penny Hamrick, the former dean and distinguished university professor in the School of Education. Starting this year, the Doctoral Student Colloquium will be renamed the Dr. Penny L. Hamrick Doctoral Student Colloquium Series in her memory. So I'm going to give a round of applause for that. We're very, very excited. The Doctoral Student Colloquium Series and the Doctoral Student Research Briefs were created by Dr. Hamrick in 2016 when she served as the Associate Dean of Graduate Affairs and the Program Director for the School of Education's PhD and EDD programs. Penny was very passionate about supporting our doctoral students and wanted to create opportunities for them to present and publish their work. Dr. Hamrick served in the School of Education for over 12 years and was in her third year as dean when she passed away unexpectedly on August 11th, 2022. In her time as dean, Dr. Hamrick grew the School of Education through the creation of new academic programs and new labs to allow more opportunities for our students and faculty to collaborate on research. She also expanded the school student services department to better meet the needs of our School of Education students. Academically, she published over 150 times throughout her career and was the principal investigator on more than 30 grants totaling $30 million. However, she was best known for the connections she made with her colleagues and the students who she affectionately called her family. In memory of her service, Drexel University renamed the park located behind the School of Education's building at the corner of Warren and Filbert Streets, Penny Park. Penny touched so many people in so many different ways, and those who knew her have their own special relationship and memories of her. So tonight we have some very special guests and graduates of our PhD program here with us to share some thoughts around their experience working with Penny as a doctoral student and as former colloquium presenters. So now I would like to turn it over to Dr. Hamida Talafian to share a few words.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Jamina, for the great introduction. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hamida Talafian. I got my PhD from here, Drexel, at 2020. I have mixed feelings being in this colloquium. I'm sad for the loss of Penny. I still cannot believe that we lost her, but I'm also happy that her ideas, her legacy, and her spirit is here in this colloquium. This idea of having a doctoral colloquium with the research brief and all the great things that are happening with it has just been very fascinating. So I got my PhD at 2020, and currently I'm here at the University of Illinois doing physics education research. Again, about this colloquium, I just wanted to share a little bit of my experience as a doctoral student. It was during my first year being a PhD student. Penny was not just my mentor and advisor, but also, as we were joking always about it, she was my mom in the US, because when I came here, I had literally nobody. And she was super, super supportive. And this presentation in the colloquium, in a way, I can say, shaped my identity as a scholar, because it was a very formal presentation, publishing in a booklet that is called Research Brief. And I have like a couple of those booklets here handy, just because I love the idea so much. For the first time, I could get published. It was citable and professional picture and all of those things. You know, if you're thinking about it as a first-year PhD student, it was really, really helpful in motivating me into the program and also like doing research and all of those things. I am very, very thankful to, you know, Penny had always had great ideas. And I'm very thankful that I was in the program and I could present. It was truly an honor to present twice in the research colloquium. and just to be in the School of Education at Drexel among all the great people. Thanks also, Jamina, for sending us this email and inviting us to the colloquium. It was truly an honor to be here. I'm glad. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Talafian. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Katrina Struloff.
Thank you, Jamina. I have the honor of representing not only myself, but some other individuals on this call. In the legacy of Dr. Penny, we actually wrote a book chapter, Dr. Ayana Allen Handy, Dr. Kim Starin, and Karina Escalante, of talking about her legacy and how it continues to live through us as scholars. And so I just want to read some really quick excerpts of that, because I think that it tells what she is meaning to her. Also, just a side note, Dr. Kim Starin and I graduated this last year with our PhD, and Karina will be graduating this upcoming year. And Dr. Allen Handy is a tenured professor here at Drexel. So, inspired by the legacy of Dean Penny, we sought to make space for independent introspection while also engaging in the collaborative process of conversations and critical analysis to discuss their narratives and themes. Dean Penny leveraged her power and privilege to provide opportunities and unwavering support for marginalized faculty, staff, and students. We each were beneficiaries of her posture towards leadership. Taken all together and coupled with the lessons we learned from Dean Penny's legacy, amplified love and aspiration to live in the virtues of our leadership out loud. Even within her story, the warmth of her leadership style, undergirded by relationships that are stark contrast to the prevailing transactional leadership approaches within the academy. Embodying Dean Penny's love for life and family, especially for the School of Education family, is a critical component of our legacy of leadership. And though she has passed, her leadership and legacy lives on in each of us, leading a live demonstration that was ever present to engage in one another relationally and towards what we lead. We embody her legacy of leadership. We recognize her leadership is out loud as we live it out loud, and reflects our desires to be audacious and about systemic injustices as critical scholars and leaders with a clear-cut focus on social justice action. Dean Penny was unapologetic about her passion and dedication to equity, and she constantly challenged us to challenge the status quo and strive towards transformation of the life of others. We too aspire to live out loud and to remain unmuted on issues of social justice and equity, particularly in our current social political context. I think there are many more words that we could share about her, but just the idea that we could discuss her legacy and continue the publication stream that she started within us and the desire, I think, is a very powerful and moving thing. So thank you, Jamina, and everyone, for letting us have a few moments to honor her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Struloff. We really appreciate your kind words. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Aliyah Amar.
Hi, thank you, Jamina. My name is Alia, and I'm originally from Egypt. I met Penny in December of 2016 at a conference in England, and she was one of the people that introduced me to the program and recruited me. We had many conversations that made me feel comfortable enough to leave my family and move here on my own. So I would not have done that without her support. It would have been very difficult. And throughout the entire program, I apologize, my dog might bark and I can't move because my foot is broken. Those of you that were my defense know that he barked the entire time because I had just had surgery. So without Penny, I would not have come to the program, and through the ups and downs of everything throughout the program, I would not have survived the program without her. She was always there for advice, no matter what you needed, anytime. And it was because of her that I eventually, when I finished the program, decided to go back into middle school and high school, because from our conversations, it was very clear. It was as much as I love higher ed, it was very clear that I belong in secondary school. So right now I work at a charter school. I'm a special education case manager and reading teacher. And like I said, I would not be here in Philly or have gone through the program if it hadn't been for Penny. So.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Amar, for your words. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Magdalene Moy.
Thank you, Jamina. All right, my name is Magdalene Moy. I'm a graduate of the class of 2021, though I think technically our cohort is 2020. It's an honor to speak to you all today as we come together to remember and celebrate the life of Dean Penny Hammerich. I spend a lot of my time in my current role as an instructional technologist at Fort Hays State University, thinking about social belonging. So I look at this from a very practical student success and retention angle, but this is a belief that Penny held and lived out in her work. When I first started my doctoral program at Drexel, I, like many of my peers, had this feeling that I was an imposter, and perhaps some of you are feeling similarly. But Penny would never allow us to succumb to those feelings of doubt. She constantly challenged this notion in us by legitimizing our thoughts, allowing us to have voice and acknowledging our potential. And this doctoral colloquium is a testament to her commitment to us. With warmth and her distinctive Minnesota accent, she created an atmosphere of inclusivity and respect that went beyond the classroom. She leaves behind a remarkable legacy as a student advocate. We, the fortunate individuals who had the privilege to know her, as well as those who continue to feel the lasting effects of her unwavering support, all share this common goal: to uphold her example as advocates for students. As we embark on this doctoral colloquium dedicated to her memory, let us remember the values that she held dear: a commitment to nurturing the sense of belonging, the dedication to seeing the potential in every student, and the firm belief that a supportive community can make all the difference. Thank you all for allowing me to speak to her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moy. And thank you so much for our PhD alum for joining us and sharing your touching words. It's very inspiring, and we'll continue to live through Penny as we go through the colloquium for the next 23-24 academic year. So thank you so much for being here tonight to share your kind words. So next, I would like to introduce Dr. Deanna Hill, EDD Program Director and Associate Clinical Professor, and our colloquium moderator for this evening to get us started.
Thank you, Jamina. And thank you again. I just want to echo the thanks to our alumni for their words on Dr. Penny Hammerich. So welcome, everyone. I'm Dr. Deanna Hill, Associate Clinical Professor and Director of Professional Doctoral Programs, and I'm the faculty moderator this evening. We're pleased to welcome all of our attendees, including School of Education faculty, staff, students, and alumni, the Drexel University body at large, community members, and partner associations, among others. The Dr. Penny L. Hammerich Doctoral Student Colloquium series offers School of Education doctoral students an opportunity to share their original research and learn from their exchange with the audience. Each month, one EDD and one PhD student presents their research at the colloquium. These sessions help doctoral students connect with each other and develop a peer community that's invaluable in supporting their journey in the program. Each doctoral student presenter is also asked to write a research brief that relates to their presentation, which is then included in an edited publication titled Doctoral Student Research Briefs, published on the School of Education's website. The research brief is a way to disseminate our doctoral students' research as shared in the colloquium in a concise format with relevance to education. Each presenter tonight will be provided 20 minutes to share their research, followed by questions from the audience. We ask that you please save your questions for the end, but you're welcome to type them in the chat area, or when we're concluding the presentation, you can use your mic to ask them directly. So I want to introduce our first presenter this evening. Our first speaker is Michael Klein, a second-year PhD student in the School of Education. His advisor is Dr. Tony May. As part of his assistantship, he works in the methods lab, and his personal line of inquiry is related to competency-based education and assessment. In the long term, he hopes to follow in the steps of his advisor and impact the program evaluation space. Michael will be presenting on a qualitative paper that the methods lab submitted for publication. The paper was part of a larger evaluation of Drexel's College of Computing and Informatics Cyber Core Mentoring and Scholarship Program. The focus of the research aimed to describe how undergraduate cybersecurity students' validating experiences were fostered while enrolled in the Cyber Core Mentorship and Scholarship Program using Rendon's validation theory as a framework. So with that, I will turn it over to Michael.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hill, for that introduction. Yes, my name is Michael Klein, and I will be presenting on validation theory in cybersecurity education. And as Dr. Hill said, this one qualitative paper was part of a larger program evaluation, and I'll also be presenting on behalf of the larger CyberCore research team, which is present here on this slide. There we go. Before we get started, I'll walk us through our agenda. I'm going to give more context to what CyberCore is and what the Methods Lab does. I'll talk about validation theory, which is the theoretical framework that underpins both CyberCore and the work that we did for this paper. We'll talk about our methods and findings, and then some implications for future research. So the research team. This work was produced by the Methods Lab, which is a lab in the School of Education that impacts the field of assessment and program evaluation across disciplines. On this paper in particular, I was a first-year graduate researcher, a part of the team that you saw on the previous slide. We were evaluating the CyberCore Mentoring and Scholarship Program. CyberCore describes itself as a program that is designed to recruit, train, and mentor undergraduate student scholars to transition to cybersecurity positions within federal, state, and local government organizations. A core focus of Drexel's CyberCore program is to strengthen national cybersecurity by supporting a diverse cybersecurity workforce, including recruiting and retaining women and underrepresented students, as well as veterans. Drexel's College of Computing and Informatics was awarded a $4 million grant over a 5-year period by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the National Science Foundation to launch this initiative to build a diverse pipeline in the cybersecurity space. As part of their grant, the CyberCore program uses validation theory as their theoretical framework. Validation theory was present throughout this piece, and I'll talk a little bit more about it on the next slide. So what is validation theory? Laura Rendon first published on the idea of validation theory in 1994 with a subsequent piece in 2002. There's been other publications as well, mainly impacting the community college space. Validation theory underpins this study, and it is aimed at supporting underrepresented students in higher education. Within validation theory, there are two types of validation: academic and interpersonal validation. Academic refers to valuing students' experience and knowledge in class. This is of particular importance for CyberCore because they have students who are change of career students, as well as students who are veterans with experience outside of the classroom. Interpersonal validation fosters that personal development. In CyberCore, that comes from professional developments that were held, individual and group mentoring sessions, guest speakers that share the identity of the students, just to name a few. Another important component, which we'll see come up in the paper, are validating agents. These are people who help to validate students. They can come from inside the university, which can be faculty, peers, support staff, and from outside the university as well, coming from advisors, professional connections, family members who help to cultivate validation for students. Both are equally important within this theory. This is the paper. This is the title of the paper that we submitted for publication. And I'll talk a little bit more about the methods. So the objective of this research was to explore and describe the fostering of validating experiences among undergraduate cybersecurity students enrolled in the CyberCore program using Rendon's validation theory. These were our research questions. So we were interested in explaining how undergraduate cybersecurity students described their validating experiences and what factors influenced those experiences. Provide a bit more context, this was an intrinsic case study that included a total of 18 undergraduate cybersecurity students. We collected data from students across various cohorts in 2021, 22, and 23. What's worth noting is that this piece is not a longitudinal piece. I'll talk more about how we plan to incorporate a longitudinal component to this larger program evaluation later, but for the purposes of this piece that I'm presenting on, this was not a longitudinal piece. We just collected data from students at different intervals. We collected data through semi-structured interviews, and interviews were conducted annually with students. They lasted about 60 minutes. They were conducted virtually, and then we took the recordings and analyzed the data. We used Braun and Clark's 6-step thematic analysis in our coding process. Those 6 steps are familiarizing oneself with the data, generating codes, constructing themes, reviewing other potential themes, defining and naming themes, and producing the report. Researchers coded independently and then resolved disagreements in coder pairs. We also had full team meetings where if new themes emerged or if there were discrepancies or disagreements, they were settled in those full team meetings. So now on to the findings. This chart here shows the percentage of instances of validating agents that were described by CyberCore students. As you can see at the top of this chart, 2 of the 3 most frequent validating agents came from within CyberCore. So students were feeling that support both in the classroom and outside of the classroom from the CyberCore program, the program in general, and also their mentors. What's worth noting as well is course instructors could overlap and be a validating agent that is a part of CyberCore, but there were also faculty members that weren't involved in CyberCore. So we did not name that as a member of CyberCore. What's also worth noting here is that these were percentages of the total amount of validating agents that students described. So they could show up more than once. That's how we got such a large number. In looking at the data a bit further, we created figures for a publication that had the themes, the frequency, and descriptions, sub-themes, and quotes. I'll walk us through this chart and one other chart. These 2 instances here were just the most frequently occurring, but these were in the actual publication, they're in much greater detail. So these were themes related to academic validation. And in sort of walking through the coding process, we started with data. So we looked at quotes. We were then able to create sub-themes, which helped us create larger themes with descriptions. So this first part here is talking about professional development. And then some of our sub-themes were career preparation, teaching technical skills, creating network of opportunities, so on and so forth. So we connected our themes to sub-themes and exemplar quotes. And that we did the same thing when looking at applied and personalized learning environments. So again, we used the data that we collected, looked at created sub-themes and parent themes with descriptions. This also showed up in interpersonal validating experiences. So the students described those experiences, we created sub-themes and coded accordingly. In the interpersonal validation, community building, and mentorship and advocacy were the 2 most frequently occurring. And again, we used the students' experiences to create these themes and sub-themes. When looking at the implications of this work, the first is that this contributes to the field of validation, or the work surrounding validation theory, and exploring it in a cybersecurity context. This is a unique context for validation theory, and it helps build the body of literature surrounding that. Also, the findings from this case study can provide insights to programs in other contexts. Validation theory is certainly not restricted to the cybersecurity space. It also helps the CyberCore team improve their practices by realizing what helped the students feel validated and what helped them achieve their academic goals, and what can be improved. In terms of future research, connecting to something I said earlier, there is definitely the potential for longitudinal research to be done with these data. That was not something that we did for this paper, but it is something that the Methods Lab plans to do in the future. Also, if there is one critique of validation theory, it is that it is very broad and does not address intersectionality of identities. So conducting further research on how validation theory impacts students when focusing on the intersection of identities is something that we plan on researching in the future as well. And then also we plan on doing work around the long-term impact of validation theory. What is another piece that we're working on is we found that there was 100% graduation rate and 100% job placement for these students in this program. So we are also interested in collecting data on how the students, how the cybercore program, how validation theory has impacted them at the professional level as well. These are my references, and I will do my best to answer questions that any of you have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. So you're welcome to put your questions in the chat, or you can open your mic and ask your question directly. And I see George. Go right ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just clapping.
Wonderful. My apologies. We see lots of applause there, Michael. All right, any questions?
I have a comment and a suggestion and a question. This is Dr. Joy Phillips. First of all, I applaud you and the team on doing this important work. It's very comprehensive and detailed. I wonder, and I can see how it lays the foundation for further work. I wonder what journal you submitted this to and if it's been accepted.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips, for your question. This was I'm not 100% sure where we submitted this to, if I'm being honest, and it hasn't been accepted yet. But we will hear back soon, and I can share with everyone when we hear back.
Sending positive vibes.
Thank you.
It's a great piece. Any other questions or comments? All right, again, feel free to put any questions. Oh, we do have a question from Chris. Michael, nice work. Could you speak to how this work has potentially contributed to your personal research agenda?
Sure, thank you for the question. Cybersecurity education is not something that I am particularly interested in researching, but I am interested in program evaluation and assessment. I think that this work here definitely lays the foundation for learning experiences that I've had along the way with coding qualitative data, and specifically in this context as a first-year student when I was doing this, making mistakes and learning from people who were more senior than me. The Methods Lab has been a great learning space that has allowed me to make mistakes and allowed me to grow in a really authentic way.
Excellent. A true testament. All right. Well, thank you again, Michael, for your presentation tonight. You can see you're getting some applause and lots of positive feedback in the chat as well. So thanks, everyone. All right, we will turn to our second speaker, Dr. Marlene DeMaio, an EDD candidate in the School of Education. Her supervising professor is Dr. Kristen Betts. Marlene is a renowned orthopedic surgeon and completed 20 years of active duty in the U.S. Navy Medical Corps. Marlene has won numerous awards in the course of her career, but says Teacher of the Year presented to her by her graduating U.S. Navy Chief Residents in Orthopedic Surgery is the most meaningful. Marlene will be presenting her doctoral dissertation research titled A Delphi Method Study, Exploring and Identifying Foundation Skills for Surgeons to Transform Surgical Education. The purpose of her study, which has global reach, was to identify essential core technical skills for all surgeons using the Delphi method. I will turn it over to Marlene.
Well, good evening. As is before, I'm trying to find my slides to show you. Can you see them?
We do see them.
Okay, so what I don't see is the way to advance. Let's see.
You may be able to, sometimes there's the arrows on the left bottom side, or You
Yeah,
may.
this happened before Dr. Hill. I just have a ribbon and I don't see. Oh, heck.
Do you want to unshare and then share again? Maybe
That's a good idea. Let's try that.
sometimes that works. We always find a workaround, right?
Yeah. All right, let's try.
You can also try left arrow and right arrow. Right arrow should advance your slide.
Okay. Goes to whiteboard. I don't see, the problem is I don't see the screen that has the slides. I'm just seeing faces of the attendees. And
So
I have a ribbon on the bottom that says, you know, mute video security.
Marlene, Jamina has a copy of your slides. Jamina, do you want to share your
That's what I was gonna say. If you want to stop sharing and then I can.
Yeah, that's a great idea because I don't want to hold us up.
No worries. And then I'll advance your slide.
Okay.
So, you can stop sharing.
And then I just now I just need to see what's I don't see any of the slides.
Can you stop sharing your screen? I'm gonna hit stop sharing. Hold on. I'm gonna see if I can just share mine. Hold on 1 second.
I think I see it now.
All right, let me put it in presentation.
Yeah, that looks good. That's definitely the first slide. And you can see my supervising professor is the tireless Dr. Betts, who is here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Betts.
Can you all see, sorry, Marlene, can you guys see the full presentation mode right now?
It looks great.
Okay, all right. Let me know when you want me to advance your slides and I'll.
Okay, good. Thank you. Well, good evening, everyone. And hello to members of my cohort. As you could see, my title is Exploring and Identifying the Foundation Skills, so the basic skills for surgeons to transform surgical education. And I did this using a Delphi method. Next slide. Okay, so we can ask why Johnny and I would add Johnetta, why can't they operate? And this has been discussed for quite a while, at least since 2009 and probably a little earlier. Next slide, please. And so part of that is that we've seen troubles with residents being independent, and they've been identified as not being independent as residents or when they graduate. Next slide. And part of the reasons for this is the surgical environment in which trainees work. The educational environment is more on productivity of cases and less on education. There's been a decrease in the cases that residents are actually doing, while there's been an increase in number and complexity of procedures. And the educator model was that of apprenticeship and immersion, and that just is not really working in this century. And we do see a lack of adult education in surgical educators. We see burnout in both the trainee and the educator, and the COVID-19 pandemic certainly didn't help. Next slide, please. So William Halstead here from Johns Hopkins is noted to be the father of surgical education, but times have changed, and unfortunately we have not. And Dr. Halstead developed his theories and principles in the early 1900s. And so we really haven't changed much for academics in terms of surgical education or assessment. Next slide. And so my problem statement is, as you see, that basically we know that surgeons agree that there have to be certain skills and procedures for the safe and independent practice of surgery. But what is the problem is the lack of evidence-based information and unbiased agreement on identification of those skills and assessment for residency training. Next slide. So the purpose of my study, which was mixed methods, was to identify the essential core that is foundational technical skills for all surgeons using a Delphi method. Next slide. So that the significance is that we have to address the surgery residency program directors, department chairs, and residents, because they themselves state that trainees and graduates are not prepared for independent practice. So much so that 3 studies looking at general surgeons, the residency directors and chairmen would not allow their residents to operate on them in their first few years of training. Next slide. So here are my research questions. The first 2 are basically, how do surgical educators conceptualize experiential learning using both the traditional, that is Halstead, and modern techniques? My research question 2 is what experiential practices do educators use so that trainees, regardless of specialty, so that means regardless of what they're going to become, whatever specialty in surgery, what do they have to acquire and master as part of their basic skills and skill development? Next slide. Research question 3, what technology, laboratories, and innovations do our current surgical educators utilize to support experiential learning and mastery of these basic skills? And then research question 4, what types of evaluation do surgical educators use to determine the mastery of this experiential learning? Next slide. So for my researcher stance, you could see that I have my ontology, which is essentially that I'm an optimist, but I'm also a pragmatist. My theory of action is to do the right thing. And people have often mentioned that I make good trouble, certainly not the way the late Representative John Lewis did, but I think what we need to do here is make some good trouble. Next slide. My epistemology is that I think the lens of time and technology just change our understanding of the facts, that while we need statistics, we have to be very careful of how we set it up and use them, and that basically research will help give us a better definition of reality and scientific reckoning. And I certainly try to be empathetic and kind. Next slide, please. So for our literature overview, Dr. Halstead comes up again in terms of the traditional surgical education. And this is really the immersion model and this science of surgery. And he is really known for the see one, do one, teach one. Stream 2 is the current state of surgical education, which is very problematic for the trainee and very frustrating for both the trainee and the educator, with hour restrictions, less exposure to cases, the explosion of techniques and advanced technology, and ethics, which now tell us that we staff need to tell the patient where, when, and how our trainees will be involved with the case. Stream 3 is our, next slide, is our requirements and innovations. And essentially the pragmatist comes out in me, but also in the literature. Keep what works and address what doesn't. And then in my area of specialty for the EDD, mind, brain, and learning, which is to apply all that we've learned in mind, brain, and learning to adult education in surgical education. Next slide. So we've got to get this study done, and that would mean getting IRB approval, which luckily happened relatively quickly. We determined our expert surgical educators who were international. We had a very specific criteria, which I won't go into tonight, but it was very detailed with emphasis on diversity. And we finally had 41 participants who started, and 27 completed the 3 rounds of the Delphi study. Access was via email, and we got consent first, and then we used our secure server for blinded emails for all participants. Next slide. So my researcher assumptions are, and here's where my positivity comes in, surgical experience can be improved. It is possible to graduate competent and independent ethical surgeons, and the mind-brain discipline can help us with that. And there's precedence to do this. And I mentioned aviation that has very strict criteria and a long training program. in order to get safe aviators. And if they do not make the cut, they don't move forward. Next slide, please. So my selected research approach was to identify the gaps in research. And what I found was that there are massive gaps, of like an abyss of gaps, that showed that there was really no core procedures that were identified for all surgical trainees, regardless of their future specialty. We had major gaps identified in how to best teach these trainees and also how to best evaluate performance. And so essentially, the bottom line, there was no evidence-based literature, no consensus, and no empiric data. So that meant it was perfect for a Delphi method study. Next slide, please. So just to review, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Delphi, I certainly had some familiarity, but not very much at the beginning of all this. So in round one, we used the pilot study to make a series of questions that were problem-based and directed at the panel of surgical educators. Round one included fairly standard demographics, but also questions about the years of academic teaching, the age of and gender of our panelists, and a host of experiential open-ended questions so that the panelists could list procedures, and some of the procedures that were listed were rated. In round two, experts were then asked to look at all these items and rank them. The items were hand-coded, which I'll talk about a little bit later, and these were then graded with a Likert scale from 1 to 4, with 1 being least agreement and 4 being the most agreement. We then proceeded to round 3 to get consensus, which would be agreement of all panelists of 70% or more, or a rating of 3.0 or more on the Likert scale. We had to have consensus of 70% on all items, otherwise we had to go to round 4 for consistency. We'll get to this, but luckily we only had to go to round 3. Next slide, please. And so our data collection was based on the skills that I found in a number of basic publications, PubMed, Medline, et cetera, as you see here. The pilot study, which we used, had 10 experts. The panelists were identified from a convenience sampling and then snowball sampling. And again, we used email, and none of the panelists knew who else was in the study. Next slide, please. Data analysis, I want to give a shout out to Caitlin Elliott, my consultant for the statistics. Each round was analyzed before the next. Descriptive inferential statistics were used. And again, we had to rank each entry of a list, for example, of surgical procedures. Each panelist would list with agreement using the Likert 1 to 4, with 4 being the greatest and 1 being the least. And then we had to have agreement of 70% or a mean of greater than 3, or that question was, quote, recycled in the next round. This data was used to relate each of the responses to demographics. Next slide, please. And so now I would like to present my preliminary findings. Next slide, please. So we started out with 59 expert educators who were international, who expressed interest. We had consents of 48, and we had 41 that entered in round 1. So round 2, we had 36 completing, and round 3, we had 27 completing. We had fairly good retention between each round, greater than 75%. Next slide. And here's our demographics. Interestingly, we had nearly equal females and males. which is unusual because about 20% of all surgeons are female. In orthopedics, it's only 7%. We had 26 physicians and 1 PhD educator who did not answer questions on actual surgical technique, but rather answered on how to teach. Their origin at the end with round 3 was 23 from the US and 4 from Europe. And you could see that we had a more seasoned group of educators, with the most being from 55 to 74, and then the next from 35 to 44. Next slide, please. Our demographics were that I did accomplish having various surgical specialties, including cardiothoracic, critical care, general surgery, and vascular surgery. However, the vast majority of the participants were from orthopedic surgery, and you can see the different subspecialties from orthopedics. Next slide, please. So for our items by round 1, again, our open-ended statements, not including demographics, were 21 statements. In round 2, after the coding, which was hand-coded by category, then theme, and then sub-theme, we had 239 new statements. And you will see that we had 212 statements that made consensus of 70% above or greater than 3 or equal to 3 or more. What was rather shocking to me was the number of statements that had consensus of 99 or 90% or more, with a mean of 3 or more. We had no new statements as needed for round 3. In round 3, rather, we had, again, very high consensus, where 53 had a greater than 70% or a mean of 3.0 for the final statements. Next statement, or next slide, please. So in round 1, we had our demographics and background. We had section 1 questions. In section 2, we had major challenges. Again, open-ended questions, and section 3 for program evaluation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So for experiential learning, we had the definition of how to accomplish, and then we had the core skills and procedures. Next slide. What was shocking, procedures had not only the actual hands-on and procedures, next slide, but also had, next slide, core non-technical skills. And there were so many skills that these could all be divided into core technical skills, such as instrument handling, suturing, knot tying, and things like that. Core non-technical skills, which were cognitive, 3D spatial awareness, general surgical knowledge, fracture fixation, and then also more difficult procedures, hands-on, handling soft tissue, open procedures, using endoscopy, arthroscopy, etc. Next slide, please. Our curriculum, or rather our panelists, when we just asked questions about the curriculum, most of them agreed, 78%, with the core skills. 71% agreed with core procedures. Only half agreed with both the core skills and the procedures, and only 4 programs, 4 panelists had the program-specific curriculum online. Only 4, very low. Next slide, please. When we looked at experiential learning outside the operating room, we could see that they did practice outside the operating room, 98% for suturing, and that when they did this, we used tissue substitutes such as plastic models or limbs tissue surrogates, again, plastic models, and virtual reality was possible in 15%. Next slide, please. Again, looking at learning outside the operating room, there was about half of the program panelists had available to them bio skills, and then the simulation lab. And we'll see that of the simulation lab, there were about a third that had high technology and only about 10% had low technology. Next slide, please. Looking at the major challenges to learning, you'll see that the top ones are too many administrative duties for the resident and the educators, too much emphasis on productivity. Also, what was interesting in teaching the teachers came up 75% of the time, and that there was less time in the operating room and less time to teach. Next slide, please. Also, for major challenges to learning, that there was just a training gap that was difficult to correct from COVID. So the trainees were coming to them with less foundation of knowledge and skills, and that there was variability among the staff. Again, we have issues with the educators. And then the idea of quality, not quantity of OR time is important, but there were so many challenges for teaching that the quality of OR time was difficult to achieve. Next slide. So again, this slide basically summarizes that the see one, do one, teach one is not working both for the educator and the trainee, and that more feedback is needed. Next slide, please. We did have a consensus with the various rounds in the Delphi method. I was extremely surprised that there was so much agreement in round 2, where virtually almost all of the procedures had consensus, with the exception of those very specific procedures by specialty, such as gastrectomy, removing a stomach, with the general surgeons and the vascular surgeons. In the third round, we had a very high agreement of the core procedures, core skills, and the non-technical aspects, as well as the major challenges and the type of assessment. Next slide, please. So for our preliminary results, next slide. I'm still doing these. I wanted to address the research questions. In summary, the research questions: 1, we don't have the see one, do one, teach one model. It is not working, and no one supported that statement. For experiential practices, the staff are using in and out of the operating room training, which was very different than the traditional model. For research question 3, there is tissue surrogates, the actual tissue simulation, and virtual reality, but there is essentially no curriculum and no consistent assessment. For evaluation to determine mastery, most of the time it's happening in the OR face-to-face, but the frequency is highly variable. Next slide, please. So the highlights of this study to date: only 4 of 27 of the final panelists, 14.4%, reported their program's curriculum was on a public accessibly website. There was no association of our panelists with all of these factors: age, gender, full-time or not, years in practice, their degree of MD/DO, whether they were in academic or private practice, their location, meaning United States or other, or military of civilian, with any of the answers to the questions by the panel in the Delphi rounds. The association of specialty was associated with complex procedures only, and not the very basic core skills and procedures, or the cognitive non-technical issues. Next slide, please. The limitations are that I did want to have 50 panelists, but I did not obtain those. We did have a very solid number, though, for a Delphi study. There was some attrition, but certainly not as much as noted in many other medical Delphi studies. I don't believe we had imprecise or confusing survey questions. With emails, I only got 3 emails back about them. I do think we had an adequate literature search, and the rounds analysis I think was very typical of the Delphi. So I think we attacked those limitations pretty well. Next slide. So the Delphi method was successful in identifying the core skills that those trainees must show proficiency, and the panelists are using training outside the operating room for objective assessment and for proficiency. Next slide, please. So conclusions, the surgeons achieved a high consensus and agreement on the core skills, procedures, assessment, regardless of the specialty, with just those few exceptions. Training outside the operating room and assessment are definitely not optimized. The aims and methods of this study may be the first to systematically query surgical educators of different specialties in one study. And I really do hope that this study can serve as a proof of concept for other problems of practice where there's no empirical evidence, and for surgical subspecialties going forward. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the references. Next slide, please. And I'm looking forward to your questions. I do, again, hope that this study can be used for future research, and how I should focus what I have here. I have 300 pages of data. I'm happy to take suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. So now we'll open it up to questions from our audience. And again, you can use the chat, or you can raise your hand, or just open your mic. You're getting lots of comments in the chat here.
Does anybody have questions about just the Delphi method? Because I must say, I'm happy to answer that. I'm still learning quite a lot, but I have to say it was a bit of a trial by fire.
So Marlene, we do have a question in the chat,
Oh,
which
great.
I know you will be interested in. So the question is, although somewhat new, do you see AI or artificial intelligence playing into this new educational strategies?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that. Yes, without question. Oh my goodness. There's several ways that it can happen. Some of you may be familiar with a virtual reality glove. So right now, I as a staff person can help guide a resident or a trainee when they're using an arthroscope. You know, I can move their hand a little bit if they're very, very new. And of course, we do this in a lab before we go to the actual human being so that they're safe. But with a scalpel, you can't do that. But with a virtual reality glove, you could pattern my motion, 100 surgeon motions, and see whose motions are the most efficient. And you can, you know, do certain ways of making it, like, you know, when you look at all the data, you know, it stays inside of a circle or an area or something. But the point of the matter is, you could then have the trainee have that virtual reality glove and do the same thing and see where they deviate and where they don't, so that they can train not only exactly how to make that cut or that pass of the suture or the knot tying, but we could show them where they're doing really well and where they're not. Right now, it's basically myself, you know, looking at them. And a lot of times I can't always see because we're working in a hole. So that's another thing I want to do. I want to use like a GoPro camera so that we can sync these things and get much better objective evaluations of people, not only in the lab, but in the OR, but also outside the operating room. There's about 5 other ways we could use AI, but I think that's the most important one. And I just, I just want to learn more about AI so that we could, do it in a can-do, win-win situation. I
So
see Dr. Kozak is here. He's our AI, one of our AI guys, right?
Indeed. I thought you would appreciate that question from him. So we have a few more questions. Actually, I want to ask them together because they're related. So what were the advantages and disadvantages of using the Delphi method for your study? And what do you attribute to the retention, or what do you attribute the retention across the 3 rounds? And then can you share your plans for publishing articles or presenting?
Yeah, so the Delphi is totally awesome when you don't have empiric data or really like precedence data, or even like, you would say case studies or some anecdotal things. So it was described by the Rand Corporation in the 50s. They were trying to figure out what would happen after a nuclear apocalypse, how awful, right? But anyway, it's developed into this really awesome approach, and there's many different types of Delphis. So the good news was I could study this problem relying on experts rather than trying to do a 10, like I'm 64, right? I don't have 20 years to make a career. And, so I could rely on the experts. I could rely on their 20 years, their 10 years, their 5 years of what they've seen and what they're doing, and get some way of organizing and understanding the problem, to identify the problem, to solve the problem. So that's the wonderful thing about the Delphi. The part that's a little difficult about it is, in my opinion, it should be used as a springboard for future studies so that you can get the objective data that you're able. There's just some things you can't get objective data, but where you can, I think it should be applied. And then the disadvantage, I would say, is that it was very new to me, so my learning curve was steep, and thank heaven Dr. Betts was always available to help me out at, like, it seemed like day or night, but that was tough. And then for attrition, every Delphi study has attrition, with the exception of 2 that I found in the literature. But what was fascinating was they made those people who were panelists promise not to drop out. And I think that may introduce some confounders or bias that is not. I don't know how you would deal with that. I'm too new to know, but the attrition that we had is acceptable for Delphi, especially in healthcare. And I believe it really, what it was just there are other competing demands, because the emails I got was that they were busy. It wasn't that the survey was hard to read or complicated or too long. I thought the round 2 survey, they were just going to drop out like flies, and I thought I'd get a bunch of emails, like, this is way too long, but that really wasn't it. It's just they're wicked busy and they're trying hard, but they just couldn't do it. So I think a bigger study would help. As for publications, there's a journal called The Surgical Educator. I think it needs to go there. The executive director of the American Board of Orthopedic Surgery is interested in this, as is there's a group of surgical educators across all aspects of surgery, which I didn't actually know existed until one of them signed up for the study. And I definitely want to use the thesis to have several smaller papers, and then I want to get grants to continue to do this.
All right. Well, thank you. And it sounds the retention question was really about how remarkable it was that you had the stable group. So fantastic.
Oh, well.
So
Okay.
we have come to the end. Marlene, you have lots of comments. So if you want to check those out, you may have some additional questions. But we're going to wrap up this evening. I want to thank our presenters, Michael Klein and Marlene DeMaio, for presenting today. And I want to thank all of you for attending the first of the now named Dr. Penny L. Hamrick Doctoral Student Colloquium. And I especially want to thank our Dean, Dr. Rudis Foster, for being with us tonight and for his continued support of the Colloquium series. Dr. Foster, do you want to say a few words in closing?
Hello, good night, everyone. I just want to give all credit to Penny for her vision for the Doctoral Consortium. I also thank all the alumni here tonight. It's good seeing you and hearing some of you. Thank you for carrying the Drexel SOE torch in your current endeavors. You're always welcome to the SOE. For the current students, you are beneficiaries of the legacy of Penny, our forever leader. Thanks to faculty and staff here tonight. It's good to see a lot of faculty and staff participating in this event. It's an event that we always encourage faculty to participate in and our staff members as well. Thank you, Deanna, for hosting this event. And thanks to those who planned this event. Looking forward to having much more of these events and seeing the success of our students, especially those who are alumni.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Foster. Powerful. So again, I want to thank you for joining us. The next colloquium event in the series will be on Monday, December 4th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you there. Thank you again.
Thanks for joining us. Have a good night.